Chapter 22. Beware of false critics, for they are wolves in sheep's clothing.
In the 1962 book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, Thomas Kuhn outlines the events through which an established system or discipline or structure, that is, a paradigm, is removed from power and replaced by a new system or structure, a new paradigm. An illustrative example would be Einsteinian general relativity replacing Newtonian gravity. Or think about how the technology of the Hubble and Webb telescopes changed science's view on the size of the universe. Consider how technology has shifted society with the creation of the Internet, or recall inchoate social revolutions, such as when colonies replaced monarchies by birthing of new, democratic systems of government. There are common elements in cases where the new emerges. One such element is that those in power within the old existing system will criticize and desperately defame the proposed new structure, often in an illogical manner, to protect their position and attempt to retain their power. With the ABT tax, critics will offer false concerns that such a transaction tax will raise prices. They will claim, for example, that each component inside a product will be taxed as it is assembled into a final product to be sold and result in multiplied taxation. Though supply chain turnover does produce a rise in the total tax on a product of maybe 4% to 5%, the impact is not meaningful, as there will be an equilibrium based upon other taxes associated with the product's production being reduced, and prices will find a true supply and demand balance in this more accurate free market. Ultimately, the total impact of the ABT tax might result in lower product costs that lower prices for the consumer, and in the complete equilibrium, the ABT tax system could improve the financial state of the product supplier's company. More significantly, remember the small size of the ABT tax, for example 0.5% for each side of a transaction, could result in a negligible tax incidence burden, meaning that the small tax will not influence the demand or supply of a product or service. Furthermore, when you remove the total costs of compliance from not dealing with the accounting of filing an IRS tax return and calculate this into the equation, even after the 1% ABT tax is applied, there will be a net gain for each company and individual. Products and services could also see a reduction in price. So beware of false critics who come to you in sheep's clothing, for inwardly they are ravenous wolves looking to protect the preferential benefits they currently enjoy under our existing tax system. Corporations might also call out that the ABT tax will hurt their profits and lower their ability to invest in new jobs. But this will not be true. In 1943, corporations and individuals shared equally the burden of taxation to pay for the federal government. In the years to follow, the trailing indicators revealed that America experienced the smallest wealth gap and greatest upward mobility in its history during this time. Then, in the 1970s and 1980s, the overwhelming political power of corporations forced changes in the tax laws. Corporations reduced their contributions to the tax revenue, prompting an increase in individual contributions. This shifting of the tax burden away from corporate taxes to progressive income taxes on individual salaries has continued to the point that today, as we know, corporations only contribute a mere 6% or so to the tax revenue. This shifting of the paradigm by corporations and special interest groups has collectively increased the tax burden on all middle and upper middle class Americans. This shift has now moved from being a correlation in the data to being the apparently direct cause of an enormous increase in the wealth gap and a huge loss in upward mobility for today's young adults. So, when corporations criticize the ABT tax, recognize this is because they are effectually paying hardly any taxes today, but would pay their appropriate share under the ABT tax. Our comprehensive economic reality is complex and interconnected. It can be difficult to see the path forward. Some will demand that the upper middle class and wealthy contribute a disproportionately higher rate in taxes. But as the data on salary income taxes shows, the top 50% of all individual taxpayers with salaries of about $43,000 and above annually are already paying 97% of all income taxes. Further increasing individual tax rates is not the answer. And as we have seen, the loss of the American dream is clear. Today, 90% of the population owns only 18% of the nation's wealth, depending on how one defines wealth. Yet, they are paying, through taxes on their salaries, almost 86% of the government's revenue. Something is not right. Logic might dictate that if 10% of the population owns 82% of the wealth, though wealth is difficult to define, then that 10% should shoulder 82% of the tax burden. But this is not accurate. Wealth and abundance, once earned and taxed, should not be further taxed for sitting idle. Wealth should be equitably taxed if that wealth or value is active in the annual economy. Under the foundational elements of the ABT tax structure, the 10% of the population who own 82% of the wealth would not be taxed for all their wealth, but only the portion of the value that is active in the economy. Similarly, those individuals and companies that conduct 82% of the transactions in society, and therefore use 82% of the economic infrastructure and common resources supplied by the government, will pay 82% of the taxes. And remember that with everyone paying, the burden on each segment of the population, even the corporate segment, will be relatively small, and so corporations will not be significantly impacted. In fact, corporations could choose to be excited by the change to the ABT tax, as the system sets companies up to be profitable for the next 100 years. Corporations and markets love stability and predictability, and the ABT tax, with its efficient technology-based mechanisms for tax collection, gives companies reliable estimates of their tax obligations and provides assurances that the federal government will be fiscally sound and stable in the future, therefore encouraging further investment. Additionally, there will be some who will criticize the ABT tax as being too burdensome on the poor and say that the poor will have to spend too much of their paychecks on food and clothes. But don't believe this either. Under the equality of the Constitution and the ideals of the American dream, everyone is to carry their own weight, from a tax perspective, even the poor. Bear in mind that elimination of all federal tax returns will provide some amount of savings to each household, so in fact, basic staples for the poor might experience a net decrease in price even with their payment of the ABT tax. And if the federal government wants to provide support to the poor, the proper place to do this is on the spending side of the government, where Congress can make these decisions in the sunshine of public hearings. Others might attack the ABT tax system as one which will stifle charitable donations, in that tax deductions for gift-giving will be eliminated. This argument is flawed, first, because the financial benefits for charitable deductions are relatively small. Second, and more powerfully, because if one believes in the free market for ideas and causes, then the quality of the charitable work should determine the amount of donations attracted, not the financial incentive for a donor to lower their payment to the government. In fact, with the average individual having the amount of taxes they pay lowered, because everyone is paying, more money in individual pockets might just make charitable donations rise. As Kuhn details in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, a new paradigm will dominate once its accuracy becomes clear, and collective wisdom will overthrow the old system and those who cling to it. The ABT tax will emerge as the structure most equitable to all Americans. This will be the truly fair free market upon which the American dream aspires to be built. It is time to shift the paradigm.